Our next speaker is Jean Simonet. He has been working professionally in games for over 13 years, originally in large studios, where he's most notably designed and implemented nav mesh-based systems for constantly streaming worlds in Bethesda games like Fallout, Skyrim, and now he's an independent developer. He's passionate about systems and simulation and hopes to make games that take advantage of those. A programmer by trade, Jean is trying to become a designer as well, so far having some success making an interesting and original puzzle game, Bomb Squad Academy, and most recently developing Electronic Die. Thank you very much, Jean.
Hello. All right, so yes, that's me, Jean Simonet, and if you're curious, it is French. And as Henry said, I've been in this industry for a while in small studios, big studios. Shipped a few games, then eventually became independent, left to create my own game. That didn't go so well, in fact. Was a part of several projects, made a lot of mistakes, but eventually made a game, a small game, puzzle game, that did really well for me. It got a rock, paper, shotgun recommendation, which they only give out maybe 1 or 2 a month, which is always, it's pretty good. And it's true that I am working on a thing called Electronic Die, but that's completely separate. I'll be more than happy to talk about that at some point. Now, today I'm here to talk to you about going indie, becoming independent. And to keep it interesting, I'm taking the format of taking common misconceptions about going independent and telling you the truth about them. I'm not going to talk about stuff that's pretty obvious, like, people think that you can build an MMO by yourself, right? No, it's the stuff that you probably didn't expect. In fact, some of it may be quite controversial. So before I get into them, let me just, make sure and remind you that this is all colored by my personal experience. There are always exceptions to all, rules and pieces of advice that you can receive. But this seems to have worked for me and the people around me that I've talked to about this experience. So the stuff I'll talk about is roughly categorized 3 different ways. I'll talk about money and what it takes to go and work for yourself, create your own company, etc. I'll talk about the process of creating, which most likely will be your first game as an independent developer. And then I'll talk about misconceptions that are kind of fun to talk about that have to do with your confidence, either lack of or excess of confidence. So let's start things off with things about, starting your own company. And the common misconception is that you should incorporate as soon as you want to go into business for yourself. The common thought is, especially if you have partners or people that you want to go into business with to work on this great game idea that you've just had, you need to make sure you have contracts in place, you have a company set up. And the thought is, you want to protect yourself against, well, what happens if this person bails part of the way through? What do we do then? Or do they still have rights to the game that we finish without them? What if you're the initiator of the thing and you want to make sure that you retain some control, when things get tough and you don't all agree on what should be next, etc. Right? And so people you talk to will tell you, you need to incorporate, you need to start a business, put everything on paper, etc. And that costs money. Right, and not only does it cost money to incorporate, it also puts you on the hook for a lot of things with the government. You have to file your taxes, even if you don't make any money, even if you don't do anything. And you essentially really don't need to do anything until you're going to be dealing with money. Until then, what you should do is write down what you think your agreement with your partners or friends is going to be, what you understand it, what you want out of it. Write it in plain English. Don't try to write legalese or anything like that. Send it to each other, like via email, and then have everybody have everybody reply and say, I agree, this is legally binding, right? Like it is something that you can later take, and show, this is the agreement we had, et cetera. It happens all the time. But you can save, all the filing fees for making a corporation. One of the things that people often don't pay enough attention to, it is a pain in the rear to dissolve a corporation as well. So if things don't go well, you just, before you even have any money going in or anything, just, don't bother. So similarly to this, people will tell you that you should hire a lawyer immediately. Part of it is so that they can help you through this process, pick what kind of corporation you should be, if you should be an LLC, an S Corp, a partnership, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The truth is, when you're starting up and you have a really small budget or a non-existing budget, you are of very little interest to lawyers. The only reason they sign you up is so that maybe down the road you have some amount of work for them that is worth their while, like selling your company because they imagine you're going to be a successful startup, or maybe you are, and eventually that will make it worth for them. Until then, they're going to try to save as much of their time as possible, and they'll end up giving you, boilerplate agreements with your name of a company filled in, et cetera, et cetera. So even though you should, wait as long as possible to incorporate, if you do need to incorporate, and there are reasons that you will, you're probably just as well off using one of the online services like LegalZoom. You will save a lot of money, and the result will be pretty much the same. The fact of the matter is, whether you talk to a lawyer or not, you need to do your homework and know what you're dealing with. Like, going into a business is not something you just do lightly, so you need to learn some things, and you're going to have to learn those things whether or not you have a lawyer involved. Of course, there's a third one, which I'll go, over quickly, which is similar, which is you should get an accountant to help you with your taxes and all this, and blah, 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 right? So if you're wanting to go and start your own indie game studio, you should do due diligence and learn what you're responsible for, etc. But as far as, like, for instance, keeping track of money, well, do this. Use one of the tools online, like Quicken or something. Keep track of your stuff. The tools are there to help you, determine what you need to file or when, or if you end up paying contractors or things like that. The stuff is there to help you, and it's a lot cheaper than, hiring a $200 an hour CPA or lawyer that's going to charge you several $1,000s. The next thing I'm going to talk about is this misconception that you should put your money into the company. So I'm getting the sense that a lot of you are probably, in college or out of college, so this may be a non-issue, right? But typically, if you're thinking of going independent, you probably have some savings, and you're counting on those savings to live on. But you might also be thinking, well, I could use some of this for the game. I'm going to need to use, contract a coder to help me with the AI for this, or I'm going to need, more pixel artist, or things like that. And you think, well, okay, I'm just going to put some of my money in the company. And of course, at some point, you have to do this. There are things you have to pay for, no matter what. But the problem is when you use this money to pay somebody else for them to live on, specifically like hiring, like a part-time coder or something like this. Because this money is money you've saved, you've worked hard for, and so you're going to value it way, way more than what it actually is worth, right? If you have $50,000 in savings, for you that's a lot of money, and you offer a coder with a few years of experience $50,000 to work on your game, they're going to look at you and go like, yeah, can you do more? And you're going to look at them like, can't you just take 20? Like, I'm living on nothing here to try to make this game. And, you're going to get into really difficult situation because, your own money, right, is in your mind worth so much more. So really the comeback to this typically is, that you think maybe you can get work for revenue shares. You can convince, artists or musicians or coders or everything to work for revenue shares. And this is, again, really difficult because they're taking a huge chance on you for, what is, according to statistics, a low chance of success that they will ever get their money back, right? So let me think about this. So it's, this is typically where you really should consider, if you need somebody to do some work for you on your project, on this great game idea, you really should consider bringing them on into the project as part of the company, whatever agreement you want, but you need them to be a part of it so that, they don't feel that they're just, playing the lottery, right? Like they have more control over whether or not this thing will work. And, as has been said before, I think it was David this morning, right? Like your friends will not help you. Especially if you have friends in the industry that are developers, they will be super supportive, tell you like, yeah, I'll help you, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes down to, actually doing the work, they will vanish. That is absolutely true. Your friend, and it's not, anything mean. They don't, it's not any comment on your project. It's just they have their own lives. They're not, their back is not against the wall. They're getting paychecks, but they just don't want to really do all this extra work. But you're there, working on this, your first indie game, and really, think that you need this, you have the, you need the help, they have to deliver stuff to you, and it's just gonna strain your relationships. So you really should avoid, relying on this. Along the same lines, there's a thought that you will be able to get financing once you have a prototype. That all you need to do is be able to, survive on your savings for long enough to get a prototype, and then, you'll be able to find a publisher or maybe go a Kickstarter route, et cetera, et cetera. You really should, if this is your plan to get outside money, financing, to sort of finish the prototype, or to finish the game, you really need to get started on that from day one at the same time that you are building your said prototype. It takes a lot of work to get those deals made. All these studios that I know that have been successful in sort of building a prototype and getting it funded really had the connections even before they started, right? They knew people at, Annapurna or the different, I can't remember now, anyway, but like all the publishers that publish indie games, etc. They had all those connections even before they started, because the people, they're not actually investing in your prototype. They're investing in you, and so they have to build this trust that you're going to come through, you're going to finish your thing. The prototype at that point really just becomes a check mark. Like it's just making sure that you can actually do what you say you're going to do. But really, the money they're going to put up is because they're confident in you or your company and your teammates, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you have to build those relationships, and that takes time. So, to sort of finish this first section, right? The overall point that I'm trying to make here is if you want to go and make your first independent game, you should stay lean as long as possible by avoiding to spend money as much as possible. Use your savings for yourself, for your living costs, and only start, considering incorporation and contracts and paying people, etc. When it comes down to, to the wire, when you know exactly what you need, what you're going to need to do. As much as possible, you want to balance, right, like the people that you have on your team with the scope of your project. If your game requires a really good AI, but you don't have any really good AI programmer on your team, then either you need to find one that will join your project and be a part of the team, and they will take their own risk with their own money and live off their own savings, et cetera, understanding the entire sort of deal there, or you need to change your project, change the scope of it such that you don't need that person. Because of course, you will you will go over all your estimates of deadlines, and things will take longer than you expected, and all that money will run really thin, really quick. And so you certainly don't want to start spending it to pay people for something that are completely necessary to you succeeding. So the next section is going to be more about the, like I said, the execution, right? And I'll start off with an easy one, which is, right, that it's okay to crunch. That is a common misconception. So it's actually not so much in big studios. There's been a lot of talk about crunch and how it ruins your health, et cetera, et cetera. The thing is, when you're working on your game, your independent game, you're putting everything you have in it. You're living off your savings. This is do or die for you. This is the thing you've always wanted to do. How are you going to justify not working 100% all the time on this thing, right? And it's easy for you to think, no, this is different. I'm not working for the man, and so it's okay for me to crunch. Do not do it. It will ruin your life. You will fall into depression. You will, ruin your relationships, and of course, you will ruin your health, etc., etc. Crunch is evil, but it is extremely, extremely seducing when you're working for yourself. This one's kind of more controversial, right? It's this idea that you have to have a big social presence to be successful. Everybody will encourage you to, be on Twitter, post as much as you can, build your network, etc. This is, how you're going to, make your game known. And this is sort of misunderstood or mistaken because, right, social media are just a huge set of echo chambers. And what I mean by that is that most of the people in your social media sort of bubbles are people like you. Typically, there are other people interested in the same things that you are. They are not necessarily the people that will buy your game, or even they're just a subset of those. Let me take an example. You've probably all watched some cool indie movies, like, I don't know, has anybody seen Ex Machina? Or maybe Moon was one of my favorites, right? These are all indie movies, but yet how many of you follow indie studios in your Twitter feed, right? Indie movie studios, nobody, right? It's just because it's this echo chamber, right? The thing you really don't, there's a disconnect between, what you think what you think your connections are and what actually ends up being the people that will buy your games. The people that will buy your game will post on their Twitter feeds that if they enjoy it, and it will spread that way, but it is not the same as your social presence. One thing that is really good about social presence is if you are going to supplement your endeavor with, say, freelance work, contract work, etc. There's a lot of overlap. And so being present, posting about your work is essentially, building your resume for people to want to hire you and give you work and et cetera. And that's the kind of stuff that you should do. But it is not how you're going to sell your game. You will want to write to magazines, You will want to, send keys to streamers and that kind of stuff, etc. The usual suspects. This is another one that's kind of interesting, which is you will hear this a lot, especially from fellow designers or people who have been in the industry for a while, that you should focus on gameplay first. And the idea here is that you can't out AAA a AAA game. Let me explain what that means, which is, right, like your indie game, however many people are working on it, isn't going to make characters better than Naughty Dog, right? Or your network multiplayer FPS is not going to perform better than Halo, right? And so people will tell you, you need to focus on gameplay first. And by and large, that's actually true, but it also gets misinterpreted to mean that all you need is a good mechanic for your game to succeed, right? And a lot of people will just think, well, yeah, I want to make a game. Let's just jam a bunch of ideas and we'll find some mechanic, and then once we have some, we'll just sort of like scale it up to a full-fledged game, and that's what we should do. And I think that's sort of doing a disservice. It's especially common with teams that don't necessarily have maybe artists on them, that all that matters is the gameplay. What I really think, and I think it's a much better way of expressing it, is that what matters about your game, especially as an independent, is its identity. And oftentimes, the game's identity is largely driven by, the gameplay mechanic. But sometimes it's driven by the art style, the story, right? And most of the time, it's a combination of everything. It's, you have to find what your game is, what it says, essentially, what it isn't, which is very important, and focus on that. And that's what you have to find more than anything else. Along the same lines, you will also hear people suggest that you should have your friends, etc., play your game as soon as possible, right? Playtest, playtest, playtest. And while it's absolutely 100% true that you should playtest your game as often as you can, I am of the opinion that you should wait a little bit before having other people actually playtest your game. The reason is this. Until you are confident about what your game is or isn't, and specifically what it isn't, it is very easy to be misled by the feedback that you will get from playtesters. Now, of course, you get the sort of cursory information that's really good, like, oh, I don't understand why this button is here, or these controls feel sluggish, or like the stuff that's that you can deal with. But most likely your friends are interested in video games as well. And so they will make comments and suggestions that are of a sort of a game design nature, of like, oh yeah, the game should be more about this. Yeah, I think maybe something more like an original Zelda kind of thing. And, and if you don't have the sort of confidence about what it is you're making, you will very likely, go down the wrong path, right? People give you terrible ideas. Some ideas are good, but you've had probably a lot of terrible ideas about what your game should do, and you've immediately sort of thrown them away. The people that play your game for the first time and give you feedback, they haven't even had that luxury, right? They're just sort of telling you what they feel on the moment, and it's not necessarily always what is the best for your game. There's another way to think about it, which is, the people just can't help but put some of their desires into the feedback that they give you. It's never completely objective to your situation, to what you are trying to build, what your idea is. There's sort of kind of always going to try to push you into the directions that they think, that they like and that they want to go to. And so it is very important to be able to say, like, you know what, no, I don't think that's a good idea at all. And if you start playtesting too soon, you haven't had a time to sort of establish the confidence in your game, you're at risk, basically, to sort of lose yourself or lose your concept. So as far as mechanics go, right, there's a sort of a common wisdom lately, and several smaller studios that try to make games that cater to streamers, right? Make a game that would be fun to play on screen because that means it's going to get a lot of exposure, and the game is going to therefore sell better, etc. Streamers play what's popular, right? They don't make what's popular. They make what's popular more popular, but really making a game that has features specifically for streamers isn't going to get you over that initial hump of getting your game, successful or popular or anything. That's just up to your, luck, and whether your game has, something special about it. Similar to this, right? The idea that you should follow the current trends, right? Like, so battle royale games do really well these days, so maybe we should make a game that's a battle royale, or collectible card games. Like, oh man, what if we make a collectible card games, but there's 4 players in it at the same time? This is how you end up with all those mashup ideas, right? Of like, yeah, well, we took all these ideas and we just sort of shoved them together. That's, that leads to garbage. That's really the best way I can put it. Every time there's a game that is all of a sudden successful, right, it's always a surprise to everybody else. And everybody is very quick to sort of, in hindsight, justify why it was successful. But you notice that no one has ever come up with a formula for what the next big hit is going to be, right? If there was one, well, everybody would be using it. So really, just don't worry about the trends. Make a game that you want to make, right? Make a game that is personal to you, right? This is an advice that is given to writers, right? They write about what you know, because if you do, it will transpire through the story. Your passion for the topic. It's the same with games. Like, make a game about something that that you enjoy. It won't be your end-all be-all. It won't be your magnum opus, but it will be, a representation of you, or you as a team, of, the game will be special because it will represent you. And in the indie market, that's actually way more important than trends. Of course, a lot of people then come back with this sort of idea, like, oh my God, wait, wrong way. That somebody else is already making a game that I wanted to make. I had this idea, it's great, I'm really passionate about it, but it's already out there. That is not true. With exactly the same core idea, your game is never going to be exactly the same as another. You're going to inject so much of your own personality, of your own, way of thinking into it. It's going to come out different. And, actually, David this morning was just talking about this when he got on to working on Spaceship Horizon. His friend was telling him, like, why would you do this? There's already a thing out there. I can't remember what the name was. What was it? Aegis, yes, exactly. It didn't matter, right? And in the end, they're very different. So really, do not pay attention to what's out there. Don't let other people convince you that you shouldn't do it, that this is the wrong idea, et cetera, et cetera. If you have something that you really want to create and share, you should just do that. Let me think. All right, so we're on the home stretch here. So now for my favorite one, right, which is this common misconception, and it's a hard one, which is people care about your game. No, no one gives a crap about your game, right? And this is hard to hear, right, because it's your baby. Depending on where you are in development stage, you have been spending all your time for the past, whatever, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years. And it is just inconceivable that people don't care about it. But like even just looking at, this was like yesterday or the day before, this was the new releases on Steam. All this game in the list is what, 15 or so, or 14, came out in one day. This is one day of new releases on Steam. And I don't know any of these games, right? But they're all absolutely convinced that their game is going to make it big and, that people are going to care about it. I'm sure there's some actual garbage in there. But I bet that actually the majority have had significant work put into them by teams of more than one person over, several months, probably years, and yet you'll never hear about them. But you know what? That's okay, because some people will care about your game, right? And that's the beauty of indie games in general, which is it's a niche market by definition. Your game is catering to people that like the things that you like. And those people that will care about your game, they will talk about it, and they will suggest it to their friends. And if your game is good enough, and if you've obviously done a good job, but you all will do a good job, obviously, then it will sort of spread and get more success. It's unlikely that you will get a major hit just by pure statistics, right? Even if we took everybody in this room, not even one of you will have a huge success, just statistically speaking, because there's just so much out there. But the majority of you could have enough success to continue making games, right? And then, you try again, and you try again. And eventually you do, hit, a major, success. I wish, I hope. I like to take the example of Angry Birds. Everybody knows Angry Birds, and everybody imagines that, this company, Rovio, just sort of like popped out this game, and it just was immediate success. They will, after the fact, justify why it happened, etc. What most people don't know is that Angry Birds was Rovio's 35th game. Yes. All the games they made before then, just had moderate successes. It was enough that they could keep working, and then they could make the next one, and the next one, and eventually they sort of hit the secret sauce. And if you ask them what the secret sauce was, they would probably still not be able to tell you, right? That's the truth of the matter, is like, good games are out there, but like what takes it over the edge is to make like the massive hits is completely unknown, right? So yeah, just don't try to formulate your game so that it will be successful. Make the game that you want to make, right? Make a game that represents you. And if you do that, your chances of the game being special to somebody else are way, way greater. And that's my advice. I'm sure I'll open to questions. If you want to know how to work at Bethesda, come talk to me after the talk. I still have a few connections there, but I can't guarantee anything. It's a tough place to work. Yes?
But along that line, are you willing to talk about why you decided to leave and go out on your own?
Absolutely. I left sort of about a year after Skyrim, and Skyrim was an incredible success. I had been at the company for 7 years at the time, at that point, and so I had gone through like 3 different games, and it sort of culminated with Skyrim being an enormous success. Everybody did incredibly well. I started working on Fallout 4 and sort of realized that I was making the same game again, right? And so personally, I wanted a different challenge. And in a very sort of a hubris way, I wanted to see what I could do by myself. I fell flat on my head, in fact. But then I recovered, made a game, shipped it, was, you know, it did well enough for me, and I'm still here 5 years later. So, but yeah, it was, you know, tired of doing the same kind of game. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, what is the electronic die?
It's a Bluetooth connected playing die, and you can use it for like your tabletop games or D&D games. It's something I'm actively working on. It's one of my 2 projects going on right now. One is porting my puzzle game to mobile. The other one is this, which is, you know, probably going to be a Kickstarter at some point. It's really cool. It lights up all kinds of colors. It's a lot of fun, and then you can make games like on your iPad that actually use an electronic die to play with. So it's cool. I have it in my bag somewhere. I can show you after. Yes.
Can you describe a normal day at work for you nowadays? Like what goes on?
Yes. My work days are the best. I get to work with my dog every day. My commutes are really, really short. And by that I mean I work out of my basement in my pajamas. That's mostly true, actually. But yeah, so actually the more sort of a salient point there is I still get up fairly early to get to work and keep a pretty consistent schedule, which was really tough when you don't really have anybody sort of, you know, telling you have to be there. But it's important to keep, you know, keep clean, wash up, and then, you know, go out and exercise and, you know, do all the things so that you're not just sitting at that computer all day. But I do still end up sitting in front of the computer, you know, most of the day. But yeah, I do freelance work also on the side, so my time is sort of split between, you know, working on my projects and working on freelance work, and, you know, I have a house and a wife and dogs, so you know, my expenses are a little bit higher, so I have to supplement still. Yes?
I work from home also. How do you keep yourself off of YouTube?
That's a good one. I don't always. I'm not always successful in keeping myself off of YouTube. Most of the time, I can find myself get into a flow of just, you know, working, and I don't know how to. I don't know methods to help if, like, you know, focus is really difficult. I don't have a really good answer, to be honest. I've been fortunate to be able to sort of focus on my work when needed, but I still, when it's not as interesting work, I'll oftentimes have, you know, like something going on, either a podcast or a YouTube video of something in the background. Part of it is also background noise, which helps, because when you're by yourself most of the day, having just noise actually has the opposite effect, like it helps you focus in a strange way. But yeah, definitely I can't do, for instance, Netflix, because otherwise I'm just watching. So I just try to find things to put on that I don't have to think about too much or pay too much attention. Yes?
How would you describe your experience before you worked at the place?
Before or while I worked at it?
So how did you get up to that?
Good question. I sent my resume to, so a college, I did actually electrical engineering, not computer science, but like many stories you've heard, I just worked on my spare time, programming, making games, et cetera, et cetera. The usual sort of backstory. Sent my resume to a bunch of studios. At the time, I lived in Texas, and got no answers from anyone. Did it a second time, and you're talking, 20, 30, 50 resume, and just you get nothing. Eventually, I tried again, and I got this one hit of this small company called Terminal Reality in Dallas, or close to Dallas, Texas. And they're like, oh yeah, we like maybe, we need a, what did they call it? A gopher, I think that's what they said. But essentially, we need a junior programmer kind of thing. And I just got lucky, that I did well at the interview, and, then they got me on board, and, then, eventually, while I was working at Terminal, got an opportunity with Bethesda, and that was pretty much it. Just, it's, you have to try again. Eventually you will get lucky. Somebody will get in touch with you. You've probably heard the same advice over and over, work on your personal projects, do your things, show that you can do stuff, et cetera, et cetera. That's just, by now it's sort of a beaten horse of like, yes, do your homework, work on your spare time. Eventually somebody will pay attention. Yes?
I was told by someone else at Bethesda that the only way to get into a company that big in the industry is to know someone who can get you in. Is that a misconception?
Unfortunately, no. So the question was, whether the only way to get into, the prestigious studios like Valve or Bethesda or Epic or et cetera, is to know someone there. And they do have a proper, HR department. They will look at resumes that are just submitted. But if you have someone to recommend you, it goes, just above and beyond anything else. It's like, for instance, while I was at Bethesda, one of my former coworker applied, and the boss just came to me and asked, hey, this guy applied, what do you think? And just me going like, he's okay. He was like, just forget it, right? So like, the opinion of people that already work there is really important, and that's why if somebody that already works there says, hey, I know this person, they would be great, it's way above that, just a random person saying, okay, well, yeah, I'm qualified and I can come. So, but that's, they still hire plenty of people out of just regular submissions. You ready? Yeah?
You talked a little bit about financing. Do you have any robust views on crowdfunding, whether you should or should not?
Yes. So a short version is you should not, especially for video games. If you wanted to make board games, I would say yes. Board games on Kickstarter especially are extremely successful. They work really well. People really love, really pay attention to them. There is a stigma now attached to Kickstarters for your video games. Too many failures or something like that. Too many games that just didn't deliver. So it is extremely difficult. Of course, there are exceptions. Hyper Light Drifter that we just heard about. For me, the original FTL was kind of original. The FTL was a huge, was probably the first really big successful Kickstarter. But yeah, it's really a crapshoot. If you want to go that route, you need to essentially know that your Kickstarter will succeed before you even launch it. And I'm not joking, right? Like that's the conception I probably should have put aside about this. The idea is that you put your game on Kickstarter, Kickstarter will take it, show it to people, they will watch your video is going to be great, they will give you money. The truth is, nobody will see your Kickstarter page because Kickstarter will not put it on the front page unless it already has traffic going to it, right? So there's a vicious cycle there. You need the people already there before you actually launch your campaign. So if you want to go that route, you need to start, email lists, get people interested, make sure that when you hit that launch button, you have people that will be notified and that will come and actually, support you on Kickstarter, and that will get you past the threshold where whoever it is at Kickstarter will notice and say, like, oh, we should put this on the front page. It's an interesting project. And then you get to the second stage. Anything else? No? Yes?
You said what you do.
Uh-huh.
What did you do in Skyrim?
All right, so did you play Skyrim? Great. Did you ever look at an NPC and tell yourself, oh my God, that NPC is not running into a wall? You can thank me for that. Yeah, that's mostly it. It was AI work, navigation, and etc., and animation work. But mostly it was keeping NPCs from running into walls most of the time. Right, which is very what do you call it? Not super rewarding because people don't notice when it works. They only notice when it doesn't. What's that?
Code did.
Yes. I wish I did, but I will carry your burdens. Yes.
Keep her daughter off the world.
Yes.
I was wondering if you had any specific advice on just the differences in marketing mobile game. You mentioned porting your custom games to mobile. And you had also mentioned sending keys to streamers and stuff like that. Obviously a big difference, but just for casual mobile, do you have any advice for that approach? Have you had experience with that?
So this is where I say something you've heard earlier today. I don't know what I'm doing. Right? Mobile is super difficult, even more difficult than PC and consoles. So yeah, all I know is you can't have a game for premium price on mobile anymore. It's sad. It really hurts my soul that you have to go free to play. But that's what you have to do, and then you have to figure out a way to make it worth it. So typically it will be, free, essentially the equivalent of a free demo is the easiest path to go, where hopefully people play your game a little bit and they love it enough that they will unlock the full version. But even for my game, Bomb Squad Academy, on PC I sell it at $5, because it's a small game. On mobile, even the in-app purchase to unlock it can't be more than $2. It's just because the expectations are so different. It's completely unfair, but it's just the way the market is. People expect everything to be free. Sorry, I don't know if I actually answered the question about about trying to get the exposure. Every story that I've heard is that if you send it to Apple, actually, so you need to find someone who knows someone who knows someone, but that is really the only way, the only real chance you have is that you get somebody that works on the storefront to try your game, and if they like it, they will gladly put it up, for a weekly whatever, new and noteworthy, etc. I don't know of any other process, and I don't know anyone either, so don't ask me. No? All right. Well, thank you very much.